Sunday afternoon, and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, and Deep South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. And joining us a little later in the program, we have our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez. She's got a very special guest coming on. And later in the program as well, we're going to hear from our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera, who's also brought on a guest. And today's topic, elections. We've been talking about redistricting here in Texas, and we're not the only place going through this kind of thing right now, so we're going to kind of check in and see what's going on around the state and around the border. But first, we wanted to start off with our top story, and that is that the RGV sector chief Border Patrol agent has been dismissed from her position. Now, in a Friday night surprise, Gloria Chavez, a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Border Patrol and the highest-ranking female agent in the agency, was fired, and there is now word on what led to her dismissal. Now, there are reports Chavez was escorted from the Edinburgh, Texas headquarters of the RGV sector less than 3 years after she took command. U.S. Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Rodney Scott released this statement saying, quote, "CBP does not comment on specific disciplinary actions. Misconduct on or off duty by a few distracts from the honorable service of the many," end quote. Chavez had a number of senior roles in the agency and was stationed in San Diego, Spokane, Washington, Imperial, California, and El Paso before being assigned to Deep South Texas, where she is originally from. In other news, lawmakers are leaving the state of Texas to protest redistricting. Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott says he will begin trying to remove Democratic lawmakers from office if they do not return after dozens of them left the state. Democrats left Sunday in an attempt to block the adoption of redrawn U.S. House maps sought by President Donald Trump. Now, some of the lawmakers are accusing Abbott today of using smoke and mirrors to make threats that go beyond his legal authority. A departure by State House Democrats and Abbott's threat intensified a fight over congressional maps that began in Texas but have expanded to include Democratic governors in California, Illinois, and New York. All have floated the possibility of rushing to redraw their own state maps in retaliation. And here's where I want to bring in our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, to join us now, because she's brought in a guest who has heard and seen and taken part in this before.
Yeah, thanks, Rudy. Good to have you. With us, we have former State Representative Jim Dunnam, a Democrat from Waco, who was the House Democratic Caucus Chairman back in May of 2003. And Jim, you led over 50 Democrats out of the state of Texas to Ardmore, Oklahoma. Similar situation, kind of seems like history's repeating itself. Tell us about the circumstances that led up to that last time, and how it compares to what's happening today.
Well, first, thanks for having me. Really, this has quite a bit of parallels to what we had in 2003, because in 2003, there had been redistricting like there always is in 2001 following the census, and the Republicans were able to draw the map, and Tom DeLay, was a top legislator. I think he was a majority leader in Congress and Republican, and he's the one that came down and drew this map in 2001 with the specific purpose of beating 6 Democratic congressmen, most of who happened to be chairmen. And so they drew the map. That's the way it is. All's fair, after redistricting, after the census. And all of those members that DeLay wanted to beat were reelected. And so in 2003, DeLay was upset about that. And he came down and says, well, we're going to just do it again. We're going to redraw these 6 members' maps. And, I got it wrong last time. I'm just going to do it again. And there was a great deal of resistance, even from the Republicans, the governor and the speaker and the lieutenant governor. But at the end of the day, DeLay was able to strong arm them into doing a redistricting, which very much like what Trump is doing now. It's not about Texas, doesn't have anything to do with Texas. It's about issues and preserving the Republican majority in Congress. And Texas is just being a tool for that. And so it was really what was happening then. Then we had Tom DeLay leading the effort as a leader in the Republicans and in Congress to redraw the maps mid-decade in a truly unprecedented manner. And so here we are again, 20-something years later, and this time it's just Trump. If you exchange Trump for DeLay, it's almost the same thing going on right now.
You took a lot of criticism for that. You all were called the chicken D's by some and the killer bees by others. I mean, was it worth it? You mentioned that, Tom DeLay was persistent in getting these districts redrawn. Was he able to redraw the districts going forward? And did it change politics?
Well, I think that what we did was very successful. We always knew that the governor could continue to call us back, and eventually they would pass them out. So it wasn't about, not, blocking redistricting in Texas. That was just not realistic. They had the majority. They had all the statewide offices. It's just the way it's going to work. However, we also had been told that DeLay wanted this done nationally. He wanted other states with Republican legislatures to do the exact same thing. And they were understandably resistant because it was an issue of nobody does this. We don't do mid-decade redistricting unless the court orders it. So they were resistant, and word got to us that DeLay had told those other states, hey, I'll do it in Texas. Let me show you how it's done. And so one of the things we were doing was trying to make a big enough statement about it and create enough public awareness that other states would pull back and not get it done. And in that sense, it was successful. Also, I think the message that we delivered has resulted in effectively no attempts of this nature in the last 20 years. And I think that goes back to what the message that somehow we were able to get out, that this is about the protection of democracy. You can't just allow the majority to redraw the maps over and over and over until they elect the people they want to get elected. And so I think that was largely successful. Those were the goals. We knew we couldn't stop it in Texas, but we wanted to get the message out enough and create national public awareness that other states would be resistant and that this would not become the norm. And sure enough, until now with Trump, it has not been the norm.
It's ironic that now actually California, New York are considering, Illinois are possibly considering on the flip side doing this. The Democrats are considering doing it. How do you feel about that? Because you said you did not want this to be the norm.
Well, I think that the Rubicon has been crossed. So you're either going to have to fight Caesar or let him sack Rome. I mean, that's just really what's happened. Somebody asked me the other day, well, Democrats are going to do this. They're going to open Pandora's box. No, the box is wide open. And Democrats, I think, for a long time have said, oh, well, the more noble purpose is to do this, that, and the other. Well, no, that's not what's protecting the voters. I mean, if they're going to manipulate the system, then we need to respond in kind. Otherwise, we're not standing up for the voters. We're not standing up for democracy. You can't just sit down and let this happen and say, oh, we feel bad about this. We're past that. We're way past that.
Responding could have consequences. Governor Abbott on Sunday night released a letter saying he would remove, quote, derelict Democrats. Does he have the authority to remove Democrats from office? And you were threatened similarly in 2003 with an arrest, a possible arrest. But were you threatened to lose your position?
No, they didn't try that, nonsense at that time, and it's nonsense this time. These members are actually representing their district. They're doing what they were elected to do. Quorum break is a legitimate procedure, as I understand it. Abe Lincoln even broke a quorum. It is a tool, a procedural tool that's within the law and within the rules that allows, in exceptional circumstances, the minority to block to some extent the majority. It is a legitimate tactic. So these members, what they are doing is what is best for their constituents, and that is fighting this unprecedented action. And all this stuff about arrest, whatever. I mean, the thing that is just so distasteful, right, is that the governor of Texas is just going to kowtow and be a puppet to Donald Trump, like we're seeing all Republicans these days, right? I mean, it's, everybody says Texas is strong and this, that, and the other. These guys are Trump's puppets. They're going to do whatever he says. If they tell him to sneeze backwards, they're going to sneeze backwards. I mean, they're going to do whatever he says. And so it's time to stand up. And that's what we did in 2003. They need to do it again. And, if he wants to arrest them, arrest them. If he wants to try to remove them, we'll see what a judge has to say about this. They got to fight this deal. This is core democracy.
We have 1 minute left before we bring on our other guests and Sal Rivera. I wanted to ask you, how would this affect those 5 districts and minority voting districts, especially here on the border, if if this redistricting plan passes and it changes the face of politics here?
Well, my understanding, and I haven't looked at the maps, is that it will eliminate 5 Democratic seats. People should understand that the computer technology these days allows the drawing of maps within a degree of certainty, then you're almost guaranteed to get the results you want. Back in '03, the reason DeLay didn't take out those 6 people is that the science of redistricting was not as defined. So my understanding is it's going to take out, and it doesn't just hurt minority voters; it hurts all Texas voters. I mean, you're going to take out members that have great deals of seniority in Congress. And like it or not, seniority is a big deal in Washington, D.C. So we're just going to take them out at the whim of Donald Trump. And it's unfortunate. And I'm glad these folks are fighting it. I think they're doing the right thing, and I hope they continue to do it. And if Abbott thinks he's going to flex and say he's going to remove somebody from office, I'd tell him, bring it on.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Dunnam. That's former State Representative Jim Dunnam from Waco joining us today to talk about redistricting efforts now compared to back in 2003. Thanks for joining us, sir. Stay with us here on Border Report Live. Salvador Rivera coming up next to continue the conversation. We're back in a minute. Welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I'm your host here in Deep South Texas, Harlingen, Texas, to be exact. And joining me now, we have our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera, with his guest, Mr. David Becker from the Center for Elections, Innovation, and Research to continue this election-themed conversation and episode. Hey, Sal.
Rudy, what we're talking about now is also something that has been brought on by President Trump and Governor Greg Abbott of Texas. They are saying that there's widespread fraud when it comes to elections, specifically done by non-citizens who go to the polls and take part in elections when they shouldn't. So people have looked into it. Experts, specifically the Center for Election Innovation and Research, and the person in charge of this group is David Becker, who joins us now. David, how did you get involved in this? What made you look into it and see if, in fact, this was happening?
Well, I've been working in elections for over a quarter century. I used to be a Justice Department attorney working in voting, and I've led the Center for Election Innovation and Research, which I founded for almost 10 years now. And we work with election officials all over the country, Republicans and Democrats, making sure that the system is working. The reality is right now is our system is as secure and transparent and verifiable as it's ever been in American history. Testament to the Republicans and Democrats who run elections all over the country at the state and local level. And there was a lot of talk in the campaign last year about the threat of non-citizens affecting our elections, fraudulently voting or registering to vote. And we saw some states that were predominantly allied with then candidate Trump, now President Trump, kind of doing some supposed analyses of their voter lists and releasing numbers. And some of them came up with numbers in the thousands or hundreds of potential non-citizens. And what we did is we went back and looked at all of their claims and how they evolved over time. And what we found is the numbers were very small, even initially, just a tiny, less than a fraction of a percent of potential non-citizens. And now, since the campaign is over and they're looking at the numbers even more closely to see if there's any potential for bringing indictments against non-citizens who voted, the numbers are almost zero. They're not zero, but they're not much more than zero. So, for instance, in Texas, last summer, Texas announced that it had found thousands of potential non-citizens on the list. But when they actually started assessing these potential claims, they only referred 33 possible cases to prosecutors to look into in the entire state of Texas, which has well over 10 million voters. So we're talking about a very, very small number. That's been consistent with what we've seen in other states, Alabama, Ohio, Florida, et cetera. States who are looking at this, they're finding very, very few non-citizens who actually register and vote in American elections, certainly well below any number that could affect election outcomes.
As you know, states all have different ways to register voters and conduct their elections. What was the methodology you used, and how many states did you actually look into?
So actually, largely, especially for federal elections, states have very similar procedures for registering to vote. It's governed by federal law. Every single person in the United States who registers to vote has to provide an ID, a driver's license number in most cases, or a social security number if they don't have a driver's license number. And then if they don't have either, they have to show ID when they show up to vote. Every single person who votes in the United States has to do that. So we know our voter lists are very, very accurate. Sometimes there are minor accidents that happen, very, very small numbers. And what our methodology was is we actually went back to the public statements made by every single state. We didn't assess the actual number of non-citizens. We don't have the voter lists like the states do. We don't have the unique identifiers that the states do. We don't have access to the federal databases that the states do. But the states do this. The states check this information, and we look to see what they said over what amount of time. And time again, when it came to actually assessing the real number of potential non-citizens on the list, we saw numbers sometimes in the single digits. I mean, there were states like Ohio that referred only 9 people for prosecution over a period of time of about a decade, which is literally tens of millions of votes cast. Georgia found around that number over about 12 years. Very, very small numbers overall of non-citizens who are voting. And you can understand why. I mean, people who are here either legally documented on a work visa or a study visa, or if they're undocumented, they're very unlikely to paint a target on their chest to potentially get indicted and prosecuted, to go to jail, and to definitely get deported if they're caught doing this, all for the possibility of casting one more ballot in an election in which about 160 million ballots are going to be cast. It's a huge risk for virtually no reward. And so this is one of the reasons you can understand we just don't see it very often.
Now, David, again, your group is nonpartisan. You were just looking for the truth. Tell us why you felt this was important and people need to know about what you found out.
Well, there's a lot of people out there who are raising money and trying to base political campaigns on the idea that our elections are insecure, on the idea that there's widespread fraud in our elections. And that's just false. Right now in the United States of America, our elections are as secure as they've ever been. Our voter lists are more secure. There's better data. We have more protections. Every single voter provides ID when they register to vote. We have more paper ballots than ever before. 98% of all people vote on paper ballots. The only exception is the state of Louisiana and a couple of counties in Texas, not the larger ones, smaller ones. And everyone else votes on paper ballots that can be recounted, that can be verified, that can be audited even after the voter is gone. So we know that the results in our elections are correct. We know that President Trump won the election in 2016. We know that President Biden won the election in 2020. And we know that President Trump won the election again in 2024. And that is totally verified. And the evidence over the period of time confirms that. But still, we hear these claims that are designed to incite supporters of losing candidates and make them distrust the system. And the reality is we just live in a very closely divided country, and no one should be surprised in a 50-50 country when your candidate loses, and you should trust the results. The public servants who run our elections in this country do a remarkably good job with complete transparency.
David, from what you know, a mail-in ballot as opposed to going to a poll on election day, is there any difference? Is it more risk or riskier to have your vote not counted if you go there on election day as opposed to mailing it in?
So in general, I think that first of all, they're both entirely secure. In order to vote by mail, you have to get on the list in the first place. As I indicated, there's ID required for that. You have to request a ballot in most states, which is another layer of security. And then when your ballot comes in, it is checked, usually the signature, sometimes a driver's license number, to make sure it matches the record on file. And to check that some other ballot hasn't come in. If someone casts a mail ballot but then also tries to go to vote in person, they will get caught. That's election fraud, and they will go to jail. It's very easy to catch. Election officials know that. So both are entirely secure. I personally enjoy going and voting in person early when I can. In Texas, early voting is very widely available. In fact, 97% of all voters in the United States have access to some early voting to vote in person. And the reason I like to do that is because I get to see the poll workers who are volunteering in our community. I get to see the election officials and thank them for their work. And I get to be there with the rest of our community. But voting by mail for many is more convenient for a variety of reasons, and it's entirely secure. And voters have a choice in almost every state, and they should just choose whatever works best for them.
David, are you going to keep doing this? Is this something you're going to continue, this type of work you're going to carry on and make sure that everything's on the up and up?
Well, our work overall is to ensure that elections are secure and accessible, and we work with election officials all over the country, again, Republicans and Democrats, to make sure their voter lists are as accurate as they possibly can be, to make sure voting is as convenient and secure as it possibly can be. So we're going to continue that work generally, but it's also important to note there's really nothing to indicate that non-citizen registration or voting is a significant problem, and hopefully we can move beyond these kinds of political myths that exist out there and try to figure out areas where we can actually improve things for voters. There's certainly areas where we can expand early voting, which is a wonderful reform that most voters have access to. There are ways we can bring technology in to make this better for voters and for election officials. And always, they need more resources. Elections are always underfunded. They're trying to do more with less constantly. And so finding ways to get them the resources they need. And if anyone out there is listening and wants to really learn about how our elections work and why they're secure, go find your local election office, your county election office, and volunteer to be a poll worker. You'll learn firsthand all of the checks and balances and redundancies and transparencies that exist to make sure that every single person's vote counts, that they're eligible to vote, and that we can trust the results.
How difficult would it be to carry out this type of fraud that we have been hearing about?
Yeah, it's, I mean, because for a variety of reasons, for all intents and purposes, it is impossible to commit fraud and steal a national election. We have not a single election entity or one election at any given point in time. Every federal election is about 10,000 little elections all over the country. The voters in Texas know this, for instance. There are 254 counties in Texas. Each of those counties uses different technology, or the elections are run by different public servants. There are jurisdictions like Michigan that have about 1,800 local jurisdictions for elections. So these 10,000 jurisdictions all run elections. The machines are not connected to the internet. The machines are all different in many cases. The ballots are all different. It's really impossible to steal a national election. Where we see fraud, it's usually in smaller local elections. But we also know that while that occurs very rarely, we've seen it in a recent election in Connecticut or an election a few years ago in North Carolina, it's always caught. It's always detectable. We have things in place that make it very easy to detect this kind of fraud, and election officials do a remarkably good job. So voters should not be worried about voter fraud at all. And those who are thinking about committing voter fraud, get ready to spend some time in jail, because you're going to get caught and you're going to spend some time in jail.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Mr. Becker. Very informative, especially the data you presented us with on the actual amounts of voter fraud. It's a very enlightening conversation that you provided for us today. We really appreciate you being here. That's Mr. David Becker, Executive Director of the Center for Elections Innovation and Research. Stay with us, because Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I'm your host down here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. Got a few headlines to send you off into the rest of your work week, starting with asylum fees may soon rise to about $15,000. State Department is proposing requiring applicants for business and tourist visas to post a bond of up to $15,000 to enter the United States. It's a move that may make the process affordable for many people. In a notice to be published in the Federal Register on Tuesday, the department said it would start a year-long pilot program under which people from countries deemed to have high overstay rates and deficient internal document security control controls could be required to post bonds of $5,000, $10,000, or even $15,000 when they apply for a visa. And in other headlines, a panel of federal judges has limited President Trump's effort to close the U.S. asylum system here at the southern border. The judges say administration can unilaterally suspend laws that bar the U.S. from deporting migrants to places where they would face persecution or torture. The ruling centers on a proclamation issued by Mr. Trump just hours after he returned to the White House in January, ordering the closure of the asylum system. U.S. border officials have used the order to expel those entering the country illegally without allowing them to request asylum. The president issued that order on the grounds that the country is facing a, quote, invasion of migrants. And before we go, we do want to remind you about one thing. Our partners at Political Power Ranker, that's a weekly show tracking the movers, shakers, and rule makers in American politics. Nexstar's Director of Political Content, Chris Berg, and Director of Emerson College Polling, Spencer Kimball, break down who's up and who's down in the world of politics based on data. The latest episode focuses on the North Carolina Senate race with a preview of 2028 in the Tar Heel State with Raleigh's very own Russ Bowen joining Chris and Spencer. So make sure to check it out. You can find more on Political Power Ranker at abc27.com or your local Nexstar station's website. And you can find more on Sandra Salvador or El Paso correspondent Julian Resendez's reporting at borderreport.com. And that's where you can also find every single episode of Border Report Live. Until tomorrow, my name is Rudy Mireles. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good day.